So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay. And in the last free-for-all, we saw a little microcosm that formed between the elves, the Sylvan Elves at least, and Isengard, one that the Sylvan Elves won. So, let's see what happens if we crank that up to 11 here, as we're going to be playing, well, we're going to be watching a match on the Cardinal Outpost, which is actually a pretty good map. I'm a little bit concerned because obviously cityscape maps like this were the ones which primarily had the crashing issues, but this never had those issues, this map, because I think actually you can pass through most of these buildings because there isn't a great deal of fences, and that, while it doesn't really help with immersion when you see units running through these buildings as if they weren't there, it does at least help with the stability of the game, so I can't complain too much there. But unlike last time, in the last free-for-all where we saw Isengard face off against Lothlorien, this time it's going to be Lothlorien's near cousins, shall we say, in Mirkwood. Now, these are two factions which largely have got strengths in some of the same areas. Mirkwood have got a couple of things that Lothlorien don't, mainly of course the Ents, and also maybe a little bit better in terms of their cavalry, at least in what people usually use their cavalry for. But we'll see. I mean, Mirkwood's archers are maybe a little bit worse than Lothlorien's, but we're still, we're really grasping at straws here when it comes to saying Mirkwood's archer line is bad, because it's not. But of course, Isengard will be on the attacks. It is a 5v3. Newbie1 is the player who sent me this battle replay, so big thank you to him. So it's obviously going to be 3 Mirkwood armies against 5 Isengard armies, so a nice themed battle here. I guess men have long since abandoned this city with Isengard's coming, but Mirkwood have stepped in to try and pick up the slack and try and defend this river and city. We'll go through the Isengard armies first of all, try and make the army composition phase a little bit quicker this time, obviously, because it's going to be just 2 factions we're going to be seeing extended a little bit out. So we'll start off with Stu Balrog. We'll go through his army in a little bit more detail, because I imagine Isengard have largely brought the same sort of units across all of their armies. Like, I would imagine the Nazkai have been brought, even though the AP probably won't be as useful as you might expect against, well, won't be as useful against the Elves of Mirkwood as it would be against some other factions. It's still a unit you kind of want to bring in this situation, because at the high end Isengard's infantry may very well struggle against Mirkwood's, but the Nazkai is a unit which can certainly hold its ground and sit in the middle of the Isengard army and still do damage, even though the AP might not be as useful as you'd like. The base damage on them is still very high, but they will still lose against stuff like the Palace Guard if they get isolated. But if Isengard play this correctly, they shouldn't be allowing individual units to get isolated. They should be using their numbers at all times. Uruk-hai Berserkers as well, very similar to the Nazkai, only they're going to be even worse off because of course they don't have any armour, and as soon as their hit points are gone, not only will the Mirkwood archers be able to tear them apart, but their low melee defense means that the Mirkwood infantry will also be able to do the same. But much like the Nazkai, they will also do a lot of damage before eventually succumbing to Mirkwood's superior quality overall. Trolls of the White Hand, again another unit which, as I've said before, Trolls in 0.97 are actually quite a difficult unit to use properly. They can be very useful, especially against low numbers factions like the Elves, because they can do quite a lot of damage while they're still up. But if you commit them at the wrong time, even the best Trolls, like the Trolls of the White Hand, Trolls of Angmar, Olaghai, all of these units will still fall away pretty quickly if you commit them either alone or if you commit them against the wrong sort of units. But if you commit them against the right sort of units, they can still do the damage that you want them to. We have a couple of units, or 3 units actually, of Uruk-hai archers. So, of course, the Uruk-hai archers are going to be out-skirmished by all of Mirkwood's forces. But Mirkwood, their archers aren't the most heavily armoured. The Hiri Peng and obviously the higher-end archers as well do also have better defensive stats also. But overall, Mirkwood don't really go in for the whole skirmishing over a long period of time with their opponents thing. They just do their damage quickly. If Isengard want to, they can try and draw out a bit of a skirmish fight here, especially seeing as they have 5 armies. If all of these armies have got a healthy amount of Uruk-hai archers, they should be able to slowly but surely grind the Mirkwood skirmishers down. If they take away Mirkwood's ability to skirmish, that's when Isengard's other sort of more important units to them start to come into play, such as the Uruk-hai crossbowmen, of course, because the crossbows, when you're talking about an elven faction like Mirkwood, they do have the quality to skirmish against Isengard's crossbows and kill them at range. Obviously lesser archers don't, because the Uruk-hai crossbows do have decent armour, but when we're talking about elven arrows, things can get a little bit dicey for the Isengard crossbowmen if they come forward too quickly. But like I said, if they can sort of take away Mirkwood's ammunition first and foremost and then move the crossbows forward, they could be onto a winner there. Obviously the Uruk-hai infantry, a solid front line. Once again, in terms of sort of the up close and personal melee fight, you imagine Mirkwood would have a significant advantage there. Isengard are going to have to rely on numbers, and if they all have got a healthy amount of Uruk-hai infantry though, that is still a decent amount of quality that Mirkwood are going to have to try and hack and slash their way through, and they will still be relying on supporting units to try and make sure that their lower numbers don't get overwhelmed by all of these Uruk-hai. And this is probably going to be one of the most significant units if Isengard can make sure they don't commit them too early so they just get shot up. Uruk-hai pikemen, because of course Mirkwood, they do not have a phalanx unit of their own, so if they do get isolated without any sort of range support or without the ability to wrap around Isengard's lines, the Uruk-hai pikemen could be potential match winners for Isengard here. So definitely the sort of thing which Mirkwood does need to be careful about, but really all they need to do is sort of make sure they have some archers in the back pocket to make sure they can shoot them. And then up here, single unit of Uruk-hai Raiders and a single unit of Dunlending Clansmen, so obviously lower end line infantry certainly, but just here for the numbers and maybe to absorb a bit of ammunition. Dunlending Clansmen, much the same thing, only, you know, better anti-cavalry bonus than most militia spears, so they could be used to try and zone out any Mirkwood cav that the defenders may have brought. Now we'll move on to Nubiwan's army. He's of course a player who sent me the battle replay, so big thank you to him. Crossbows, once again, you know, they need to be careful not to be committed too early, but their stopping power could be incredibly useful for evening out the fight on the front line, as of course could the extra range that the Uruk-hai pikemen provide. But again, they need to be very careful they don't commit themselves too early, lest the archers tear them to pieces. He does actually have a unit of half-orc Baneguard, which is an interesting choice because they are of course one of the sort of standard units of shock infantry that Isengard have. Obviously their Berserkers and their Nazkai are obviously upper end. The Baneguard are one of sort of the standard ones, but they are the best of all Isengard standard shock infantry overall in terms of stats. Now, they have less numbers than a unit like the Reavers, and they don't have the anti-cavalry bonus that the Dunlending Wild Berserkers have, but they do have better defensive stats, certainly in terms of their armour, so they will be able to keep themselves alive individually better against Mirkwood, but I still question whether or not a unit of shock infantry like this is going to be really useful. I mean, if you're going to go shock infantry against Mirkwood, personally I would try and go for the more quality, because even though then you're dumping in a lot more money into a unit that is primarily AP focused, which is not necessarily the best thing against Mirkwood, they will at least be able to look after themselves and do a lot more damage than a unit like this would, isolated. But we'll see. Maybe I could be wrong. The Baneguard could do quite well in this fight, as long as they're supported properly, as with all other units of shock infantry in every situation. Uruk-hai Archers, good to see them. We also have some Snaga Skirmishers. A good choice if they can get in close and do some damage. Obviously, for such a cheap unit, cheap javelins are pretty easy to get cost efficiency off with, as long as they aren't shot up again by the archers. But this would be less of a concern, I think, than getting your pikes or your crossbow shot up as Isengard, because the Snaga Skirmishers ultimately, while javelins like this can be a bit of a pain in the neck, they won't devastate a front line in quite the same way that a unit of upper end javelins will, and also they're very cheap, so obviously Isengard, if these are the things which are going to be taking arrows, then they will be freer to use their crossbows later on. Nubiwan has also got a higher concentration of Uruk-hai Raiders, so obviously he's gone for a little bit more in terms of sort of a trashier unit on the front line in comparison to Stuf Balrog, but even so, they will do the job. He has gone for some Dunlending Berserkers, and this, I think, if I were going to bring a shock infantry unit of this kind on this map against Mirkwood, I probably would go for the Dunlending Berserkers. Normally I'd go for the Reavers of the three units that Isengard have available in terms of their cheaper axemen, because they've got the most numbers. Their damage values are very similar to the other units as well, so ultimately, for what shock infantry are, and for what Isengard need to be all about, I think the Reavers overall are the best choice. But on this occasion, where there could be cavalry swarming around, the Dunlending Berserkers do make a pretty good option, because Isengard, of course, they do have plenty of anti-cavalry options in terms of crossbows and pikes, but for a little bit more mobility, just to give Mirkwood something else to think about, this unit could be good for sort of making sure that the stuff like the Sindar of the Girdle don't have quite such a free ride if they charge right into the middle of all of your infantry. 3 units of Uruk-hai infantry, speaking of which, obviously a nice solid front line, a unit of Nazkai and a unit of Trolls of the White Hand as well. The first army over on this side of things, we have MSQ2, who's got 3 units of Dunlending Clansmen and Skiltron here at the front. Obviously very easily avoided by cavalry if it wants to charge across the river. But it looks neat to see Skiltron across the front line. I mean, Skiltron is definitely the sort of thing you see in sort of standard Medieval 2 and Vanilla 3rd Age. You used to see it quite a lot. It's much less common in Reforged. Only very, very few units tend to have it, but there it is. Uruk-hai archers, once again, like I said, a good choice in this situation, because while they will be vastly outperformed by Mirkwood's archers, they will at least force Mirkwood into using their ammunition on a unit that they probably wouldn't want to. Uruk-hai crossbows, once again, be interesting to see how MSQ2 uses them. Snaga skirmishers, so a lot of skirmish power. He's also gone for the Dunlanding veterans, which is not necessarily the worst move either, because once again, anti-cavalry bonus on the Dunlanders. It's not huge, like, don't get me wrong, they won't do as much damage as like a spear unit, but it does still give the enemy something to think about. Like, if your charge is poor, if you get one of those charges where your cavalry just sort of walks into the enemy infantry, usually you can sort of cycle them back out without too much damage being done. But if you do that against Dunlanders, that can be more of an issue. So it just makes you that little bit more wary of charging into an infantry line. And Isengard, like I said, have already got plenty of other anti-cavalry options without having units like this have little minor bonuses here and there as well. Trolls of the White Hand, once again, we actually have an Isengard ballista as well, which will be fantastic. It's always fantastic to use this on a river crossing battle like this. Obviously, the Dragon's Breath cannon has stolen the thunder of the Isengard ballista a little bit, but the Isengard ballista is a much more reasonable unit. It's not grossly overpowered, but in this sort of situation, it's still a very, very useful tool, especially against low numbers, high quality factions like Mirkwood, because every hit scores a lot of value. Guards of Orthanc, we saw them perform very well in the last battle, actually, under a lot of pressure from Lothlorien of all things, so definitely earning their salt there. We'll see if they can do the same here. Obviously, they're not going to get tons of kills, but they do have a lot of holding power, which could be the key here for Isengard, just try and outlast or weather the Mirkwood storm, as it were, and then slowly but surely start to gain the upper hand, which a unit like that will be very good at. And of course, I'm glad to see the champions of the White Hand are here, because it does give Isengard a little bit more mobility, and also as the most damaging anti-cavalry cavalry in the game. The Mirkwood cav is going to have to be, if there is any, will have to be very, very careful about how they choose to engage the champions of the White Hand, because they are not to be taken lightly. Nazkai are over here, as well as just some Nazkai. Interesting indeed. The 4th Isengard army, commanded by Wilbo. He's got, I imagine it's going to be quite similar over here as well. Uruk-hai archers. One problem they may have is the Mirkwood archers might be able to shoot right across the river, and the Isengard archers may not with their range. So it may be that Isengard need to get a little bit more creative with how they decide to use their archers. We shall see. Dunlanding clansmen. So a lot of Dunlanders on the field today. He's also the Isengard army to have brought the half-orc spear guard, which again is maybe not the worst idea in the world, because of course, like every spear, they offer a bit of anti-cavalry power, you know, able to zone out the enemy. Also shield wall, so if it comes down to it, Isengard of all the orc armies are probably the least equipped for a mass push, but this is a unit which will probably be at the tip of the spear of any Isengard mass push. So maybe not the worst idea in the world, because Mirkwood, of course, are fairly susceptible to that sort of thing if you can get them into the right position. Dunlanding veterans, lots of Uruk-hai infantry and pike, so a good mix of lower end line infantry, mid-tier line infantry, and obviously solid pikes as well. Skirmishers, Guards of Orthanc, Champions of the White Hand, and Trolls of the White Hand as well, so a good mixed army here by Wilbo. Let's see how he uses it. And the final Isengard army going to be commanded by Pharaoh, who has got some Dunlanding clansmen and Uruk-hai archers here on the front, lots of stakes, crossbows as well, maybe a little bit close to the front line. But remember, this is only one Mirkwood army that these two can potentially tag team here, but they're going to have to cross bridges in order to do it, which of course, Medieval 2 bridges are always a nightmare to try and negotiate. Snaga skirmishers over here, another unit of Snaga skirmishers. A little bit further back, we have the meat and potatoes of an Isengard army, Uruk-hai infantry and pikemen once again. And also we have some Nazkai, obviously. Good to see so much of Nazkai on the field, because obviously the temptation may be to not bring them, because they're an AP unit which is very, very expensive. But like I said, at the high end, Isengard don't have many units which can go toe-to-toe with some of Mirkwood's really good stuff. But now the Nazkai can. They won't necessarily win if they're on their own, but if you support them, they could be the difference maker, as could the Uruk-hai Berserkers, to be fair, to a lesser extent. Now though, let's have a look at what the red team have on offer today, the defenders. We've got Tommy Wiseau, who's going to be playing as Mirkwood over on this side, so he's going to be getting tag team, but you can see that he's got a unit hidden up on this hill because there are stakes there. Yeah, definitely one of the things which Mirkwood are going to have to rely on here are their archers, because they are so outnumbered, even though their infantry is of much higher quality overall than well, say much, the Uruk-hai are decent, but you know, Mirkwood's infantry is obviously of higher quality than Isengard. But the numbers discrepancy is such they can't rely on their melee prowess alone. They're going to need to rely other supporting units, and obviously Mirkwood's archers are one way they can really do that. So there's going to be archers, there's going to be woodland realm patrols, probably going to be wardens of Amon Lank as well, because of course AP and melee will be very useful against Isengard as well. We've got Hiri Ek and Hiri Alth, 2 units which will be very good at holding the line, especially with the armour upgrades such as they have here, give them a little bit more staying power on the front line. Elder Council will always be useful because of their javelins. As their abilities as spears, to be honest, I mean, they could be used against the champions of the White Hand, but I would imagine that if the champions of the White Hand can start running around in behind enemy lines, that could be devastating, so Mirkwood really need to stop that happening in the first place because of their already lower numbers. Upgraded Hiri Peng, which is obviously going to be good, you know, in terms of a skirmish fight, Isengard's Uruk-hai archers will stand no chance against upgraded Hiri Peng, but there are only going to be so many of these Mirkwood archers, whereas Isengard have got quite a lot of Uruk-hai themselves. Hiri Alth over here as well, more Elder Council. Tommy has to hold these 2 bridges, which, to be fair, because they are bridges, he does have every chance of doing so, but if Isengard do push forward, I mean, if I were Isengard, if I were on the Isengard team, I would be recommending that these 2 armies just push right across the bridge with everything right from the off. And the other 3 armies down here, I mean, maybe I would get Newbie 1 to move over here to get ready to be a second wave, and then the other 2 Isengard armies not as quickly moving across here because it's much more dangerous to do so on a wider terrain like that. And also with 2 Mirkwood armies are going to be over there as well, so take it slower but make sure you keep up the pressure so they can't just reinforce over here, but I digress. Hiri Ek, we have some Hiri Alth. Elders of the Elven King with their Silverthorn arrows could be incredibly dangerous, and of course the Elven King's Palace Guard with the armour upgrade as well. Absolutely devastating unit of infantry this. Really only the Nazkai can even come close to that, as well as of course the Ents. The central Mirkwood army, we have Unknown Soldier, he's got some Blades of Emondweir, so maybe going for a little bit more in terms of numbers, which might not be the worst thing in the world, honestly, to try and at least gain back some kind of quantity in this situation. Because if you go all in for quality, you could find yourself just getting swarmed. If one of the defenders goes in for units like the Blades of Emondweir, you have a much better chance of having the numbers to withstand a big assault at some point. But we'll see. Upgraded Hiri Ek as well, we have some more Ents. The sprites for the Ents are always quite odd, they're much bigger and much more brown from a distance, it's kind of strange. Some Hiri Ek, some Hiri Alth, so all of the Hiri units, the heavier Mirkwood units with all their armour upgrades, will be a very necessary part of the defence this time round, I think. Woodland Realm Patrol hidden up on this high ground, and I imagine there will be a lot more. I mean, the thing about Mirkwood is so much of their armies, so much of their skirmishers in particular are capable of hiding, so it can be quite difficult when you're trying to go through the army compositions like this, because they clearly have more than just this. But you can't really see where they are. I'd imagine there's going to be more up on this high ground, maybe a little bit more over there on that high ground as well, over there, because they're good positions. Of course, Keren Amroth Rangers are probably somewhere, and with 3 units of Keren Amroth Rangers on the defence, that will be the biggest equaliser that Mirkwood have against Isengard in this situation. It's probably the thing as well that Isengard are most wary of. Mirkwood may have a lot of strength in melee and sort of with their cavalry and at range just with their regular archers, but rangers are capable of getting kill counts other units can only dream of. Elders of the Elven King back here as well, and then the final Mirkwood army. We do have a ballista over here. It'll be interesting to see if that can be used properly from the Vengeful One. The Isengard ballista should have every advantage here though to be able to snipe this one out, but we shall see. We'll see how the Vengeful One uses it. You can see where he's got some hidden units as well. Elder Council once again, upgraded Hiri Peng. Also some Blades of Emondweir, some Hiri Ek upgraded once again. Some Ents. And then over here a couple of units of cavalry. We have some Bows of Emondweir and the mighty Sindar of the Girdle. With how many champions of the White Hand there are on display, Isengard probably do have the cav advantage, to be fair. But it's always good to have some Sindar of the Girdle. If anything, I would have maybe suggested that another one of these 2 armies here should maybe have brought a Sindar of the Girdle unit as well, because they're so effective at what they do because of their high melee defense. But no matter, without further ado, let's begin. So in this sort of situation, of course, I tend to go with the army of 5 attackers to have the advantage from the off, and I would do so here as well, because I think they have all the tools to make Mirkwood's life very difficult here. And I actually think the key to this fight could very well be these lowly Uruk-hai archers. If they are used properly, all of the attacking armies have got at least 1 unit of the Uruk-hai archers, which is key here, because it means that they can roll them forwards, they can start shooting. Of course, they will initially start taking heavy losses, but all they need to do is make sure that Mirkwood's ammunition is, at the very least, vastly reduced by the time they start really moving in across all of the choke points. And to be honest with you, I'd be very tempted, like I said, to have both of these two Isengard armies over here charge in with everything they have all at once to Tommy, because he's having to guard 2 choke points. They may be 2 very thin choke points, very highly defensible as well, with and around patrol revealing themselves. Not rangers, but still a very capable archer unit. And even if, you know, Tommy, clearly he'll have a unit of rangers around here somewhere, I would imagine. I mean, he'd be mad not to, they're so good. But the fact of the matter is, if these 2 armies attacked all at once, he can only target his rangers on one of them. And time again we've seen the attackers, one player on the attackers has to take the fall in order to give the attackers the momentum. And again, it's a grisly job, but sometimes you just gotta do it. And you can see, actually, I like this from Wilbo. He's sending forward a lot of units. I mean, quite a lot of them are quite poor. I mean, Dunlanding clansmen first, Dunlanding veterans. In terms of just pure melee abilities, Mirkwood will not be all that concerned with a bunch of Dunlanders charging across the bridge, but I think maybe a bit of pathfinding errors here. Like, I'm going to be far more forgiving in this situation when there's pathfinding errors around the bridges, because in Medieval 2 it can be a real nightmare to negotiate these things, and it's part of the reason why you very rarely will actually see bridges like this used in a big way. Like, usually people will now go for like land crossings like this, even though it doesn't make a lot of sense with the way that the river lays out. From a gameplay perspective, it's just so much easier to balance a map around that, because the bridges can impact how the map works a little bit too much. You can see here the Dunlanders once again just setting up over here, maybe Pharaoh being a little bit more cautious. His army's a little bit more spread out after all, but I like this. You can see over here as well, first units getting a little bit closer. Uruk-hai archers have been involved in a bit of a skirmish fight with Mirkwood already, of course, several dead Uruk-hai on the floor. Isengard Ballista trying to sort of rotate its way into position. Interestingly enough, though, the Mirkwood Ballista is now in position, and when it comes to a ballista fight, it can very often come down to just who gets the first shot as to which artillery piece is actually going to go on to be victorious. Meanwhile, a very nice elevation here to shoot right down into these forces as they move forward. But it's also quite exposed, but I don't know, I mean, shooting into a unit of Dunlanding clansmen, the cheapest unit that Isengard have available to them, MSQ2 will probably take that all day long, but it's actually better for him shooting into that than it would be into his archers, because it means his archers can hold their effectiveness for longer than they are shooting now. One slight issue with trying to skirmish with Mirkwood, of course, is the fact that a lot of their skirmishers can hide, so Mirkwood can choose to just not engage with their skirmishers, and Isengard will not be able to target them, but we'll see if that turns out to be the case as this fight goes on, if that's how Mirkwood want to approach this. Wilbo is moving across the bridge now. Of course, the Dunlanding clansmen are going to really struggle against the Blades of Emenduia backed up by the Hiriak. But this is a lot of Dunlanders moving across the bridge. And I actually approve of this, but the only way that this works out for Isengard is if I think it has to be Pharaoh who has to move in as well. Like, they both need to put a lot of pressure on Tommy here, because if they do, it will force... At worst, it will force more reinforcements to come across from over here, which does look as though is happening now from the Bench of One, but of course that means much more fertile grounds to attack over on the main choke point, as I'm going to refer to it, the land crossing over there. So even if Wilbo and Pharaoh end up having to be the sacrificial lambs on this occasion, I don't necessarily think that's the worst thing for their team. And I approve of Wilbo's aggression here, but Tommy Wiseau has his Greenwood Rangers pointing right down that bridge, so if I were Pharaoh, this would be the green light for me to push most things across the bridge, because the Rangers were the thing that I would be most concerned about, to be honest with you. Regular archers are dangerous, of course, but you can see over here, Snaga skirmishers moving in, so trying to do a bit of damage to these front lines before they move off. Obviously, Tommy is, at the moment, focusing most of his attention on the other choke point because of how aggressive Wilbo has been. So he's probably not aware that the Snaga skirmishers are coming in, but I do think Pharaoh does need to move forward a little bit more aggressively. Like, he has an opportunity here. And Wilbo is sort of throwing himself on the pyre a little bit, but this is only going to be useful for his team if one of them decides to take advantage of it. The Greenwood Rangers have gone back into hiding, having done a little bit more damage. The half-orc spear guard are moving forward with veterans on the front line. Obviously the clansmen will get torn to shreds in this sort of situation, but the veterans and the spear guard will be a little bit better at the very least, but they're still going to be vastly outclassed by the Mirkwood infantry that's on the front line. Bows of Emenduia firing away. Upgraded Hiri Lung are now here as well, so it doesn't get any easier for Wilbo's first foray across the river. Meanwhile, a little bit more aggression happening over here as well, which is good. They do need to continue to, they do need to sort of make this worth it to some extent. The Greenwood Rangers shooting in, but once again, MSQ2, a stroke of luck for him, because the Dunlending Clansmen, this unit of Dunlending Clansmen has absorbed so much in the way of ammunition that it maybe shouldn't have already. He can afford to be very pleased with the performance of his fodder. No kills, but they've managed to achieve their value through other means. I mean, look at that massive Isengard force, which is massing itself up on this side of the river. So yeah, Mirkwood, to be fair, they do need a few lucky breaks in order to be able to use their skirmishes to their fullest effect, and I think not really Wilbo's fault, but I mean, you can see here that Wilbo, his aggression, despite the fact that his units are obviously of lower quality, with the amount of numbers, his spear guard as well, the mass push, not something you see from Isengard all that much, but it has been done a little bit here, and Isengard, they could send more across, and he is. More Dunlending veterans are on the way across the river, so nothing too serious here, but Isengard are putting some pressure on, and the Sindar of the Girdle are having to charge in here. An okay charge. That's a lot of spears in there, so yeah, the charges will probably break the units that are already depleted, which is probably what Mirkwood are hoping for, but Isengard performing a little bit better there than I thought they would, and Wilbo's doing the right thing here. He's not letting up, he's continuing to push units across the river. Speaking of which, I can see the Ents fighting on the bridge up there. Hiri out now pulling back. The Ents are right in and amongst things over here. And to be fair, why not? I mean, it was only Snaga skirmishers and Dunlending Clansmen, so these are obviously units that Ents will smash into the dirt all day long, but with Trolls the White Hand moving forward, the Ents probably do need to pull back. Tommy's army, as expected really, is the one under the most pressure right from the off here. He's having to deal with those two choke points after all. Woodland Round Patrol in a perfect position to sideswipe any units that decide to cross. But Pharaoh's army is also a little bit more spread out, so he's not quite ready to engage in the level of aggression that Wilbo has. Stu Balrog is now moving forward, Newbie 1 is moving forward, so all three of the Isengard armies that are on this side of the map are sending in their forces now. Uruk-hai Raiders and Dunlending Clansmen in the first wave, backed up by Uruk-hai Archers. There are some units of quality nearby though in the Trolls of the White Hand. Not actually in melee, mind you. Greenwood Rangers over here. Elven Archers, of course. An extra point of missile damage next to regular Rangers, so they're even more devastating potentially than that. I have to say, I really do approve of what Wilbo's doing here. Like, his army is in danger of sputtering out eventually, but the aggression is good to see. Very often we see people not really willing to take advantage of a situation, and I'm actually pleased to see that. I mean, and now you can see there are more forces heading across the bridge from Pharaoh as well, so he's going to be doing the same, and that's the way I think Isengard win this fight. Wilbo and Pharaoh don't necessarily even need to outright win over here. They don't necessarily need to take this area. All they need to do is force enough reinforcements to come over here to stop them, that their allies can then just push right up the pipe and go straight for the settlement, as it were. Although I have a feeling this battle will actually be decided outside the settlement entirely. Woodland Round Patrol doing damage. That is the downside to this plan, of course, though, is can Pharaoh and Wilbo's armies withstand the kind of pressure that Mirkwood's archers can put them under? Not easy at all. Javelins are also in here. Trolls the White Hand and Ents going toe-to-toe with one another. Unfortunately for the Trolls, though, their only support for the time being was the Dunlending Clansmen. Their Uruk-hai infantry arriving now, but when you've only got militia spears backing you up and you're up against heavy elven spears and Ents, it's going to be a difficult task for most units, to be fair. I have to say I'm a little bit concerned about zooming in on some of these fights, because the Rangers are being used fairly liberally at this point in time. But as they should, because if you have a look over there, the Trolls have been committed forward. This sort of blob is exactly the sort of thing that the Rangers need to shoot at, to be honest with you. And you can see now Woodland Realm Axemen have revealed themselves. Wilbo's army is starting to struggle a little bit. And the only thing he has left to really commit forward at this stage would be something like the Uruk-hai Pikemen, which of course would be an irresistible target for any of Mirkwood's archers. Greenwood Rangers are over here. A massive Isengard force here in the middle, of course. This is going to be the main epicenter of this fight. This will be where the true battle is decided, essentially. Whoever wins this sort of middle engagement, I think, will go on to win the fight as a whole. Woodland Round Patrol out of ammunition, pulling out their blades and getting into melee alongside the blades of the Emondwyr. Hiriak. There's also the Elven King's Palace Guard on the front line already, which is a big committal, but I mean the trolls are coming in. The trolls will really not want to be in melee with the Palace Guard, but we can also see that crossbows have moved forward. Just look at the amount of dead Dunlanders here. Devastation, really. I mean, the Woodland Realm Patrol, the Wardens of Amon Lank, this is the issue. I mean, there are a lot of Uruk-hai archers and crossbows in sort of their range now. They're going to be able to shoot back at a lot of these archers, but Mirkwood will have the advantage in terms of damage. I think even with the crossbows, the range advantage will go to Mirkwood because they just have the better position. But the thing the crossbows will do is make it more difficult for Mirkwood's skirmishers to perform at their peak. And I think Mirkwood need their skirmishers at their peak if they're going to win this fight. Woodland Realm Axemen, a unit of infantry that can hide, of course, dual axes, so decent melee defense and decent melee damage as well. Obviously unshielded and relatively lightly armoured, but in this sort of situation, they could be very useful. You can see there the Elven King's Palace Guard, 25 of them, holding alone against all of these Isengard forces, and still victory seems certain. But they were taking damage from the crossbows for a little while there. More trolls are moving in. You know, Mirkwood, they're really sort of, it's really backs to the walls here. Mirkwood are really sort of struggling to keep this line alive, which is a sign that Isengard are being as aggressive as they need to be. When the defenders aren't comfortable, that's when you know the attackers are doing a decent job. You can see over here Wilbo is continuing to push forward, and at this point, with how aggressive they're being on the main lane, Isengard need to continue to be aggressive across these bridges. Like I said, they probably won't, they don't necessarily need to win, and they probably won't, but they need to keep this up. Need to do a job for their team here. Greenwood Rangers revealing themselves once again. Over here, Mirkwood's lines over here are sort of much better constructed as they were. They're not much nicer shape. Hiri Peng now adding themselves to melee as well, and Isengard are bottled up. There's still one Ent left alive. Pharaoh's army not really able to gain too much of a beachhead, but like I said, all he needs to do is keep up the pressure, and he will be doing his job. Wardens of Amon Lank continuing to fire. Obviously a really strong archer in their own right. Pharaoh, obviously he didn't commit forward as aggressively as Wilbo did, so he still has a fair amount left in reserve, so at the very least he still has a lot he can send across the bridge. Whereas Wilbo is not so fortunate. Elves of the Elven King using their silver thorns to shoot into the Uruk-hai archers across the river, just trying to prevent them from laying down any support for what remains of Wilbo's army. And there we go, silver thorns at work, sending units flying. Uruk-hai pikemen trying to retreat back across the bridge now, although I think that's probably a pathfinding error once again. Looking like the ballista. It tried to support Wilbo's advance, I think, to give MSQ2 a bit of credit, a bit of good battlefield awareness there, but not the best angle for the ballista, to be honest with you. It would have been great if he was trying to hit Isengard, but unfortunately that wasn't the case. Ents are now on the front line as well, so the trolls were committed, the Ents were committed. It's just a right rumble here on the front line. But Mirkwood now have gained the upper hand. So you can see that obviously Isengard's skirmishers still doing their best, the Uruk-hai archers. The crossbows, though, have definitely been focused down, which is exactly right from Mirkwood. The Uruk-hai archers are much less of a concern, especially with most of Mirkwood's heavier units with the armour upgrades. They've got good shields as well. So Uruk-hai archers are not going to be as much of a concern for sort of affecting that battle on the front line. The crossbows would have been, however, and were. They did a lot of damage to that unit of Palace Guard. But that's much less of a concern now that they've taken so much damage. Hiri Peng, and still that unit of Woodland Realm Patrol up on the high ground. Woodland Realm Axemen doing a good job. There's a lot of Dunlanders here on the front line. But they're obviously going to be no match. There's still Palace Guard there as well, to be fair. I mean, there's still 23 of them, which, considering the beating they were taking for a little while, is impressive. The axes of the Wardens of Amon Lank are moving forward, so a really brutal fight here on this front line. And it shows no signs of slowing down anytime soon. In comes the Hiriak. See, this is the sort of battle where how well the defensive archers are used are going to be is going to play a massive part in the outcome, and of course it's very difficult to keep track of what archers are doing what when you're watching the battle like this. Guards of Orthanc coming forward. We saw how resilient they were in the last battle, but I think that was Wilbo's general. Guards of Orthanc will continue to fight for a while yet, of course, but again, not exactly the sort of unit you want if you want to try and break through a front line, but if you want to hold and engage for a long time, they are, and I think that's probably the best service Wilbo can provide his team at this point. Just make sure that Tommy's army is occupied. Snaga skirmishers routing. They got a few volleys off, but they were eventually shot up by the Greenwood Rangers, which is obviously very bad for a unit as lightly armoured as the Snaga. Elders of the Elven King. Once again using those silver thorns. They kind of have a shot. Some of their archers are going up into the air because of course their own units are kind of in the way, but still Pharaoh, and you can see how majorly stacked the deck is against Pharaoh now, mainly because Tommy, he has largely been able to finish Wilbo off, so most of his army is now going to be able to come over here to stop Pharaoh's advance, which that's maybe the thing that these two did slightly wrong. You know, they should have attacked all together at the same time, whether Wilbo waited a bit or whether Pharaoh went forward at the same time as him. It doesn't really matter. If they had done that, this would have been a little bit more successful, because one of them still would have failed, but one of them may very well have been able to push in and sort of make this a fight on more open ground, which of course the more numerous Uruk-hai would certainly prefer, and of course that does mean you can start chasing down all of Mirkwood's skirmishers, which are their primary strength in this situation. So that would have been something I maybe would have done differently. There's still javelins coming in, and Tommy's army will still be very damaged, of course, having had to deal with 2 large Isengard pushes, and there are of course still 3 Isengard armies there. The champions of the White Hand are trying to charge through the enemy lines. I mean, this is an interesting gambit. If they can get these champions of the White Hand in behind enemy lines, it could be devastating for Mirkwood, but they're going to take a lot of damage doing this, because that's where the remainder of the Palace Guard are. And when they do take a lot of damage, the Sindar of the Girdle will be there to engage them, and it would be an interesting fight. I think the champions of the White Hand would win it if both units were at full strength, but they're fighting more on Mirkwood's terms than anything else here. A lot of the champions of the White Hand did actually make it through there, so the Sindar of the Girdle may just have to be sacrificed here to make sure the champions can't start charging through Mirkwood's back lines. The champions are still trying to push through, but they're going to take so much damage pulling through the Sindar of the Girdle as well. I can see why they're doing this, because these Mirkwood archers are doing so much damage to them, and they need to get into some of them and start stopping them temporarily at least. But the problem with this is Mirkwood's archers like this are pretty good and pretty handy in defending themselves in melee, so even when they do get there, it's not going to be the easiest task. They will do some damage, of course, but not really enough to make it worth their while. They were trying to go after the group. Yeah, now this is surely the end of them. There goes the General, MSQ2. I can see why MSQ's done this. It hasn't maybe worked out exactly the way he would have wanted. That was probably the best charge he got right there, actually, into the Rangers. But the Rangers have probably already dealt so much damage to the advancing army that is it really worth their while? Are they going to go after the Hiriek? That would be a bizarre choice. Heavy spearmen. Are they going to try and just run off into the hills at the back of the map? That's probably the best thing to do at this point in time. At the very least, it will give them... Oh no, they're routing. Never mind. Isengard, though, with the champions of the White Hand pushing through, there is now more of a gap over on this side, and to be fair, there are Nazkai over here, a lot of good Uruk-hai infantry as well. If another wave of Isengard pressure comes forward now, they may very well be able to splinter this Mirkwood defence. I mean, there's trolls coming forward. That would certainly be one way to do it. Really solidify the shock value that they've gained, but a little bit too late there. Hiri Lung and Hiri Pang are now moving forward to reinforce the failing section of the front line, which is a shame because Uruk-hai infantry were just arriving on the scene. Trolls are moving in. They're going to try and do some damage to the middle against the Woodland Realm Axemen and causing a lot of Mirkwood's units to shake or become shaken. How's Wilbo getting on? Doesn't have much left, but I mean, Tommy's had to take away a lot of his army to fight elsewhere as well, so this is a situation. No archer support, limited amount of elven infantry where the Uruk-hai pikemen should shine. It's only a very small battle happening in the grand scheme of things here, but Wilbo's still alive and kicking. A thorn in Mirkwood's side still, and of course denying Mirkwood any easy victories across the whole of the battlefield is one way that if you're 5 armies fighting against 3, you can make life very, very difficult for the defenders. The Woodland Realm Patrol firing still at units that are crossing the bridge, going after the Uruk-hai Berserkers, definitely the right thing to do. As soon as their hit points are gone, they are very, very vulnerable to arrow fire of all kinds, let alone high quality elven arrows. Isengard, though, starting to gain a bit of an upper hand over here, and it doesn't surprise me too much to see that coincides with the arrival of more pikemen. Isengard's starting to force Mirkwood back, keep them at arm's length, and this is the problem. When Mirkwood start to run low on ammunition, phalanx units can be a real issue for them in this sort of situation, and of course their pikes are one of Isengard's most well recognised strengths, so if they can really leverage that here throughout the battle, then they should be in a pretty good place as this fight goes along. Even the Palace Guard over here, although to be fair I think the Palace Guard, yeah, you can see the Uruk-hai archers are shooting into them all the time with a perfect shot. They may not be the best archers, but when you have a perfect shot into them over a long period of time, that's bound to do a lot of damage. Elder Council. There's also the Uruk-hai crossbows as well. Nazkai moving across the bridge. I mean, Pharaoh's army is, again, very depleted, much like Wilbo's, but I'm not convinced Tommy's actually going to win this fight anymore, which is probably not what his allies wanted to see. Even if Isengard aren't going to have much in the way of reinforcements coming down here, what they really needed was Tommy to have some reinforcements to help them here, because of course this would have been 3 armies going into this one choke point, and it's been such a brutal fight up until this point. More Ents and more Trolls just wading through the ranks of the opposing armies. The Trolls have started to die off now, to be fair. Hiri starting to do their thing. There's Guards of Orthanc on the front line once again. Going to make the Isengard attack very difficult to get rid of when you've got Guards of Orthanc in the middle of it. But there's a lot of heavy Mirkwood units as well. There's still a lot of arrow fire flying back and forth from both sides, to be fair, but more so from Mirkwood. You can see there the Silver Thorns hitting into the Uruk-hai crossbowmen. Javelins coming in. There's a lot of Isengard skirmishers back here. Javelins, crossbowmen, archers, all doing their bit to try and soften up the Mirkwood army. And of course, when you're dealing with an army that isn't the biggest in terms of their numbers, this is definitely the best way to go about things. Let's see here. There's still the ballista. I'm not sure how much ammunition the ballista still has in it, to be fair. I haven't really seen it firing as of yet. Still a lot of Isengard reinforcements to come over there as well. Bows of Amenduia still alive. Some reinforcements heading across from Unknown Soldier to try and help out Tommy. And you can see the Greenwood Rangers from the Vengeful One also now pulling out their blades and getting into melee. And that should be enough to overwhelm Wilbo's Uruk-hai pikemen. So finally a victory. A genuine victory, I think, for Mirkwood. Wilbo still has his Snaga on the bridge, as well as his Uruk-hai archers. Champions to the White Hand from MSQ have actually returned from routing. I don't know how they managed to get back over there. They were routing over in that direction a while back. But Wilbo still has some units on the bridge, but again, it's interesting. Neither side has really won this engagement, which, to be fair, means Isengard have done an adequate job, because Mirkwood need to win fights like that if they're going to go on to try and win the battle as a whole. Pharaoh's army as well, starting to struggle now that there's more reinforcements arriving to try and help Tommy out, make sure he wins this fight. The pikes have done an adequate job up to this point, but Isengard's manpower is starting to decrease a little bit, which is obviously going to be bad news. What have we here? Uruk-hai crossbowmen still trying their best. I mean, once again, I feel as though over time Mirkwood will just about have enough to win this, but they're going to have so little left that they can't really rely on any reinforcements from Tommy's armies coming to help them down in the south of the map. So it is an interesting situation in that respect, I suppose. That regardless of what happens up here, like I said, I think this is the key engagement. Guards of Orthanc actually routing. They pushed through the line there, which is interesting, but the ballista now managing to shoot right through the Isengard ranks. A lot of these units, some of the smaller units are starting to break. It's very rare that you'll see the Guards of Orthanc rout. But there they go. They must have been shot by the ballista and just lost their bottle. There may have been javelins forthcoming as well, but the problem I can see here for Mirkwood is I'm not convinced they have enough left in the tank to withstand all of Isengard's reserves. We shall see. It's definitely been a very brutal fight on the front. Let's see what Isengard just have left. Just to see, I mean, there's crossbows, there's clansmen. Just the fact they have crossbows in reserve, though, is a good choice. That they've held some back for the late game to try and make sure they have something capable. A couple of units of line infantry, raiders and infantry. There's one unit of Nazkai, some pikes. So Newbie 1 has got some stuff in reserve. Whether it will be sufficient or not remains to be seen. It's definitely been such a brutal fight up until this point that it could still go either way, because I mean Isengard are much more likely to mass rout than Mirkwood, so I mean especially when you see this sort of punishment coming forth from an artillery piece, that's the sort of thing which can send an Orc army routing, even the slightly more professional Uruk-hai. But that remains to be seen, doesn't it? What happens over here, I wonder? Snarger, I mean, technically Wilbo, I think... There goes a general. A general that was over here. I suppose that could be Tommy's or Pharaoh's, to be fair, because I think both of their generals' units were in here. Isengard's general blends in very well. No, yes, Thranduil is there, so yeah, it must have been Pharaoh's. Yeah, his army is also running out of steam. Mirkwood will need these reinforcements down in the south eventually, because like I said, I'm not sure they have the manpower to withstand the reserves that Isengard still have. Defeat seems certain. Only a military genius could win this battle. Quite so. Uruk-hai crossmen still firing away. Uruk-hai archers on the move forwards. And there go Woodland Realm Axemen. I think they're starting to siphon more units off. I mean, they're not going to be too concerned about Uruk-hai archers joining the front line. They're so bad in melee. And in this situation, like, overwhelming force for Isengard isn't going to happen, I don't think. It may very well happen down here, mind you. What have we got here? Ooh, champions the White Hand. Being hunted down and destroyed. Archers still there. The Vengeful One bringing forward some more archers. Elders of the Elven King, so more Silverthorns. Wards of Amon Lank as well. Their services will be much required in melee as well, I think. There's actually 2 Elders of the Elven King over here, interestingly enough. I mean, this ballista from the Vengeful One could prove to be absolutely vital. It's got such a good shot over here. And if Mirkwood have sort of fashioned this front line so the ballista does have a good shot, then all credit to them, because they absolutely need to do this. They need to try and cut through Isengard's manpower as best they can if they are to have a chance at winning this fight. Again, another good shot. The ballista doesn't do a huge amount of damage in the same way that a trebuchet or a catapult can, but you can see they're wavering. The best service the ballista might be able to perform here is to chain route the front line, which changes the whole complexion of the battle, I think. If that is the case, Mirkwood may very well be able to go on to seize the initiative in this fight and not surrender it again. So Isengard may be in a little bit of a sticky situation here. There are some Uruk-hai archers that have pushed their way. Well, I say that. Wilbo has managed to sort of flank around with what very little remains of his army, but his Snarga skirmishers in position, shooting their javelins into the back of this Mirkwood force, and all of a sudden, once again, it's been a very, very even fight across the whole battlefield so far, and those javelins might be enough to give Pharaoh and Wilbo the advantage up here once again. And like I said, whoever wins this fight is not going to have a huge amount of reinforcements to send south, but that could be the margin by which this battle is decided ultimately. Definitely an interesting fight. Uruk-hai crossman is still there. Yeah, like Pharaoh's committed everything forward at this point. Wilbo's got his units on this side of the river. Snarga are trying to avoid being in melee with Woodland Realm Axemen, because even with only 10 of them, the Snarga are not looking like they are going to stick around for too much longer. I think the problem Isengard are having here is that there are still elite units in here. Hiri Lung, there's still Wardens of Amon Lank in there. Elders of the Elven King, there's only 6 Elders of the Elven King left, to be fair. Unfortunately for the Isengard players, the inaccuracy of their own javelins means they could actually get a bit of friendly fire here, of course, as well. Not ideal for them. Meanwhile, Elders of the Elven King shooting down, and like the position of Mirkwood's line over here is very, very well considered, I have to say. And that may be the difference maker here. Silverthorns finding their mark, Snarga still doing their thing, and there's still support coming from Isengard's ranged units, and you can see here, I think, well, at least more of the reserves are being sent forward, so there's going to be some Dunlending clansmen, as well as a couple more units of line infantry being sent to the front line. And to be honest with you, this maybe should have happened a little bit sooner, because in positioning their front line in such a way, obviously it means that their ballista has been devastating Mirkwood, but it has left a bit of a gap, which Isengard haven't really tried to exploit. I mean, the Guards of Orthanc sort of made that gap initially, but were sent routing, but ever since then, Isengard haven't really looked to try and get in behind the line, or at least try and change the shape of the front line so they're not completely at the mercy of the Elven artillery in the way that they are. Uruk-hai crossbows are moving forward, of course. The fact they still have a couple of crossbows saved up until this point could very well be a huge factor going into the late stages of this game. How are the Snaga getting along? They're still there, although they're getting charged down by Sindar of the Girdle now, so that is going to be the end of them. There's Elders of the Elven King in melee with them as well, so Wilbo, it was a brave effort to try and get Pharaoh and the rest of his army across the river, but I think he may very well be the first player to fall, which often, when you're aggressive in the way he is going to be the fate that befalls you, but he's done a decent job for his team here, Wilbo. I can't imagine he'll probably have a very good kill count, but the idea behind what he was doing was correct, I think. Just a little bit of a timing offset between himself and Pharaoh was probably the only thing that the two of them did wrong. If they had that on point, I feel as though they would have gained a victory in this section of the map. As it is, I'm not sure you could really call it a victory for Mirkwood, but I mean, I suppose technically speaking it is. They're going to be able to move forward now. The Uruk-hai crossbows can look after themselves in melee, but I mean, 5 Wardens of Amon Lank in a sort of narrow choke point with some Hiri out. Yeah, I think Mirkwood are going to win that. Snaga still fighting. Victory still a distinct possibility. Thranduil himself, will he be laid low by Snaga? He'll never be able to show his face in his realm again. Meanwhile, Sindar of the Girdle moving in wedge formation back down to the south. Here we go. Isengard now have moved forward, and this is the difference now. Mirkwood have moved some of their forces back to the settlement to try and take advantage of those choke points, which is probably the best thing to do here. Obviously this is a sign that you're going to be giving up the front line, but Isengard, I'm surprised they didn't do that sooner, because there was a gap to take advantage of. They were running the risk of running right into a ballista and getting routed, but in the end they have done the right thing, as it were, and Isengard will be able to now take the river en masse. I mean, Mirkwood have still got some forces up in the north, which could prove to be a little bit of an issue for Isengard, but I doubt they'll be too concerned. They're going to want to just move straight towards the settlement. I think a single unit of crossbows would probably be enough to just shoot any reinforcements Tommy still has left from the north. Another unit of crossbows can move forward as well. They still have pikes on hand. Isengard, which, like I said, in the late game against Mirkwood, could be massive as well. So we are going to see the settlement in action, which I think is good. We're seeing sort of the whole of the map used, except for sort of this area up here, I suppose. First time I played on this map, I was Rudar and I hid a bunch of hidden units up here, and when they started attacking the settlement, I attacked from behind later on, which it didn't really work, to be honest with you, but it was neat nonetheless. It is a good map, this. I do like it. Nice mix of a river, field and siege all in one. What more could you ask for? Hiri Pang up on the walls. Again, Mirkwood have not got that much left, to be fair. Elders of the Elven King, 2 units of them. A unit of Elven King's Palace Guard. I mean, what they do have left is very high quality, there's no doubt about that. Ballista crew obviously had to abandon their piece, but they'd already done a lot of damage with that, to be fair. I mean, I don't really think Mirkwood have got enough to hold the front line. I mean, I don't know how much ammunition the Elders of the Elven King still have. With their Silverthorn arrows, they could do an awful lot of damage, but ultimately the ranged advantage has to go at this point to Isengard with 2 units of crossbowmen. Because yeah, it's 2 units of Elders of the Elven King, but the crossbows are in far greater numbers, and they'll be able to pretty much saturate fire on what the entirety of the Mirkwood army that's remaining now. Elite units like this always do better when they're sort of in a supporting role to the regular army, and there is no regular army left now, except really for this 1 unit of Hiri Pang. There goes Thranduil. Cut down by a crossbowman. Hiri Pang firing away. I mean, yeah, they are absolutely right in trying to go after the crossbows here, I think. Newbie 1 and Stu Balrog still have a few left, and trying to take care of them is going to be absolutely vital if Mirkwood are going to go on to win this fight, which is not impossible. Like, in terms of melee quality, they vastly outperform Isengard at this point. What's that? I thought that was 1 unit then, but they're stretched. Still 2 Elves of the Elven King left, just trying to kill off as many Uruk-hai as they are possibly able to. They still have a unit of Nazkai, I'm pretty sure, Isengard, but that's only 1 unit. And individually speaking, like, the problem is though, like, Isengard have got an actual army left. Whereas Mirkwood, they just have a few units here and there, so I mean, it's all for Mirkwood to do here. Elven quality is all well and good, but are they going to be able to do that here? Uruk-hai Crossmen, they're going to try and get in position to shoot, but a volley there from the Elders of the Elven King, doing a lot of damage to them. Their armour's decent, but it's not going to save them when they take direct hits from Silverthorns, unfortunately for them. Uruk-hai Archers still have ammunition, of course. This has been a big theme in this battle as well. The Isengard have had a lot of range support going into this battle, and they were able to leverage it to a certain extent. They had a lot of archers and Snaga skirmishers and crossbows, especially down here on the southern choke point, in position, doing damage to Mirkwood. Now, they wouldn't have been getting the same sort of numbers as Mirkwood, but based on the situation, they didn't need to. And I did pick out the Uruk-hai Archers as potentially being one of the key units in this battle, and I do think they have been, because they have made it a little bit more difficult for Mirkwood's army to stay set. And also, the Uruk-hai Archers have mostly not actually been focused down, so a lot of their ammunition has been sent Mirkwood's way. Most of the units that got focused down were stuff like the crossbowmen. Rightly so, of course, but that still means that you're leaving a unit of archers to basically do as they will. Meanwhile, what do we got with a unit of 12 Uruk-hai Crossmen? I mean, I imagine they're going to try and shoot the Elders of the Elven King here. Indeed they are. Well, I mean, there's only one unit of Elven King's Palace Guard. Yeah, they just need to send everything towards this one choke point at this point, I think. And be content with that. Isengard gathering all of their forces on this hill before eventually moving in, of course. And like I said, like, this is another real problem Mirkwood face, this unit of Uruk-hai pikemen, because unless they can focus them down with their Silverthorn arrows, the pikes can just keep the small Mirkwood army that's left at bay. So, I mean, I feel fairly confident in the assessment. I think Isengard are going to win this fight from here. The quality is not on their side, but they have the supporting units. They have, you know, like I said, an actual army left, whereas Mirkwood, it's got the feel of more just sort of a final resistance at this point, and this is also quite key. I mean, if it was just regular units against the elites, maybe Mirkwood, if they kept the fight narrow, could do something. But Isengard have got their own elite unit in the Nazkai, which, while not as strong as the Mirkwood units that are on offer, at least one-on-one, the matchup doesn't really favour the Nazkai, it's still very key that Isengard have got this unit left in support. Because there's no way that Nazkai don't go up against anything and not do any damage at all to it in melee. Not even the Palace Guard. Meanwhile, over here the Hiri Peng taking damage, and this is also not good. Like, the Hiri Peng, they need to sort of use their ammunition now, I think, because they're going to be needed in melee as well as at range, given the desperation of Mirkwood's current situation as the rain is falling. Perhaps there's a reason why men abandoned this settlement. This Isengard force was simply too much, and Mirkwood not going to be able to win this one, I don't think. A few units still hidden in reserve. Elders of the Elven King, like, they may as well send the ballista crew forward as well, just have everything on station ready for one final stand, because again the percentage is going to be pretty close, I think, because these Mirkwood units will not go down without a fight. And it's not impossible Mirkwood win this, but they're going to need to position their archers extremely well, and they're going to need to hope that Isengard don't force path their way through units. Because if they do, like, mass-wise, there's no way Mirkwood survive that. Yep, they're going to go through the buildings. Well, I mean, Isengard just hanging out at this point. What's going on? Is there another fight going on over here? Yes, there is. Snaga skirmish is routing, so Wilbo was still alive up until this point, I guess. And the Sindar of the Girdle finally finishing them off. Going to chase down the Snaga now. Again, Snaga have probably racked up a pretty decent kill count for themselves across the whole battle, considering their very low cost. And there you can see the vengeful one padding his kill count out nicely with some Snaga there. The Sindar of the Girdle proving to be a worthwhile addition here. If they weren't there, the champions of the White Hand that pushed through the line could have been a nightmare to deal with, but they were. And of course they're one of the few units capable of withstanding the champions of the White Hand, especially when the champions of the White Hand have forced path through all manner of spears and the like. What have we here? Uruk-hai Archers moving forward. I'm actually a little bit surprised that Isengard are being as cautious as they're currently being, to be honest with you. I mean, given Mirkwood's current state of disrepair. Eerie Pain? What are they doing? Are they chasing after something? Well, they must have been. There's a dead Uruk-hai crossbowman here. The rest of them are routing off now as well. Actually, no, they're not. Pharaoh's still got 5 of them left. What a bizarre end to this fight. Considering how aggressive the initial engagements were, I'm actually very surprised that, especially Isengard, are being as cautious as they're being at the moment. I think it's actually worthwhile to go up to ×2 speeds. I mean, surely the best thing from an Isengard perspective here is to just be maximum aggressive, swarm over Mirkwood. Being more cautious actually plays more into Mirkwood's hands because it allows you to focus down individual units one at a time. While they may not be the most important thing, it still takes away, slowly starts to put chips in Isengard's vast numbers advantage. We shall see. The main body of Nubiwan's army really does need to get a move on at this point. Take a page out of Wilbo's book, the true MVP of this battle. I'm sure he got the lowest kill count, but he's the MVP in my heart for just being aggressive. That's what I like to see. Elves of the Elven King. Don't know what they're going to do. Stu Balrog sort of taking the vanguard in this situation. Nazkai are also moving forward. 14 of them. Didn't even know Stu Balrog had 14 Nazkai still alive. So, how will the elves choose to die here? Crossbowmen are still there. Elven King's Palace Guard are here, and there are fences here actually, so they will actually be protected, I believe. Still taking damage from those crossbows. Eventually the rest of the Isengard army will catch up, Nubiwan dragging his heels a little bit here in the late game. They do still have ammunition here, the Elves of the Elven King, and they're going to start to fire. And why not? Going to do a lot of damage here. Sindar the Girdle. And again, their usefulness is probably going to be fairly limited when the pikes move forward, but I mean, they will be able to charge in here, do a decent amount of damage. I mean, I say that was a very weak charge there. Don't know what they were doing. In come the Elven King's Palace Guard. Eerie Pang's still there. And again, this was kind of unnecessary. Isengard could have moved forward far sooner than this and dealt with this earlier. Uruk-hai crossbowmen routing under the charge from the Elven King's Palace Guard. Not too surprising. Pike's going to be leading the way, which is kind of interesting considering that the archers still very much have ammunition. MSQ2 is there. What is Nubiwan doing with the rest of his army? Bizarre decision making here. I mean, it's not going to cost Isengard all that much, I don't think, because I don't think Mirkwood are going to be able to make up the cost difference, but this is the kind of misplay which, if the game was closer here in the late game, could have cost his team the win. 36 Nazkai. No, 14 Nazkai, 36 Uruk-hai archers. Much less impressive. Snaga skirmishers are here. So, sending forward the pikes without support is a wild decision when you think about it. Because now they're going to be able to get shot, they're going to get sandwiched in between. Wait, that's 3 units of Elves of the Elven King. I thought there was only 2. Well now. A single unit of Elders of the Elven King is very substantial. That might be the sort of thing which makes me change my assessment, to be honest with you. Especially if Nubiwan continues to play in a very newbie way. Not impressive at all. Like, sending your pikemen, throwing your pikemen to the walls, one of the best tools you still have left, is not a good idea at all. Uruk-hai pikemen are over here, and the ballista crew sort of trying to delay them a little bit longer. There's only 6 of them left though, so that's not going to last much longer. So a couple of Sindar of the Girdle, which should still prove to be a factor in this battle. The pikes are still fighting. Palace Guard, they're of course going to rip and tear their way through what remains of Stu Balrog's Uruk-hai pikemen. Nothing too surprising there. More Silverthorns coming in. Shooting at the right targets, to be fair. Trying to go after that Nazkai unit. If they can shoot that Nazkai and do sufficient damage to it. I mean, there's still a lot of Isengard to chew their way through, to be fair, but keeping the engagement narrow with these elite units, who knows? I've seen stranger things happen. It will definitely be a close battle in terms of percentages now, because Mirkwood, they're going to bleed Isengard pretty severely for this. But the battle will be decided sooner rather than later as we enter the very final stages. 22 Uruk-hai pikemen going to try and close the jaws. Still 5 ballista crew there. Hiri Peng also firing away. That, I believe, is Stu Balrog's general, as they were fighting off against the Palace Guard over here. Hiri Peng still with a bit of ammo left though. Elders of the Elven King getting surrounded a little bit now by Uruk-hai pikemen though. Will that be something that makes a difference? Possibly. Oof, Snaga skirmishers getting ripped asunder by those Silverthorns. Uruk-hai crossbows doing their best to lay down a bit of support as well. Uruk-hai raiders joining the front line. Still some guards of Orthanc in there as well, but Palace Guard, no joke in melee. It's still Sindar of the Girdle as well. And let's not forget, of course, this unit of Elders of the Elven King still have to be committed to melee as well. Fire arrows being loose. They're going to try and break Isengard, which is not necessarily the worst idea, but there are certain units in there which simply won't break, mainly the Nazkai. Snaga skirmishers running around. There's still Uruk-hai crossbows, but the crossbows are not in a good position, and this is why I'm surprised Isengard didn't seize the initiative and try and overrun Mirkwood when they were a little bit more spread out. Because now their crossbows are not really in a decent position to shoot. I mean, eventually they may very well get there, but this was a situation I don't think Isengard ever really needed to be in. And there's hope for Mirkwood yet. Still all of these Elders of the Elven King. This is maybe something I'm less in favour of. Like, I'm always a little bit concerned when someone does this, when they try and pull their units off the front line, because like, I don't really know what they're going to try and flank all the way around, but by the time they get there, this fight will be decided one way or the other. And I think it's going to be decided in favour of Isengard. So I think Unknown Soldier may very well, unless he sends those Hiri Peng to plug the gap that he just left, I think he may have just thrown his team's last chance away. We'll see. Always concerned when someone does that, when the fight is sort of on a knife edge and then all of a sudden someone retreats units off the front line. The quality of the Elven units that are still alive, I mean, fortunately he has done the right thing by plugging the gap with those upgraded Hiri Peng, and sending those Elders of the Elven King around now may very well be the sort of move which, well, they're coming back now, so I'm not entirely sure why they bothered to do that in the first place. The crossbows though, this probably is the one section of the front line they do have a decent shot, which is why they're still targeting the Hiri Peng. In comes some Uruk-hai infantry that flanked around. Newbie one, that's another important move there, so some Dunlending clansmen. Elders of the Elven King are coming back now because they have no choice, and I still... 18 Palace Guard, like, slowly but surely all of these Elven elites are losing their numbers, and with crossbow bolts and javelins coming in as well, and Mirkwood with not really much to try and respond to that with. Yeah, the last Sindar of the Girdle has now fallen, so yeah, I think Isengard, they're going to get away with it, ultimately. Played well. Played very well, for the most part. I mean, it just had the potential there for Isengard to not be as aggressive as they needed to in the late game and give Mirkwood a way back into it. But, fortunately, Newbie 1 was one step ahead, and he did manage to send units around the back. Dunlending clansmen now surrounding, so yeah, Isengard will go on to win this, but it was looking pretty dicey for a moment there, and Isengard have been made to really work for it right to the very end of this fight, to be honest. But the banner of the White Hand will be raised over this former settlement of men. And another victory for Saruman. It's been a fruitful few days for Isengard, I must say. And I think it does go to show Isengard, they may not have, like, I feel as though people, when they look at Isengard, there isn't much that sort of really stands out about them. Like, in the same way that, like, in Ladris or Khazad-dûm or Numenor, they have, like, these, like, really high-end units which are real showstoppers. Isengard don't have many of those. Like, really, the Nazkai champions, the White Hand, are the only two. The rest of their army seems rather plain by comparison, but it's effective. Like, the quality, the mix of quality and quantity that you can get with Isengard is very difficult to deal with, actually. As long as you build your army well, which Isengard, it's not all that difficult to build an army which is going to be effective in most situations. You can be a difficult opponent. And I do think 0.97 has been quite kind to Isengard in those ways. And of course crossbows, which are of course very good in 0.97. But they're not quite as obnoxious as like the Erebor crossbows or the Cardinal crossbows. Cardinal do need their crossbows, to be fair, though. The rest of their army does struggle a little bit without the support of certain units. Dunlending Clansmen, Snaga, and so Isengard victorious, 94 to 100%, a very close battle indeed for a 5v3. And well played to Isengard. It'd be interesting to see. So yeah, Wilbo. Actually, Stu Balrog getting the fewest amount of kills, which is interesting. So he must have been the first one into the central choke point, and indeed he was. He sent his clansmen. Well, actually, no, MSQ2 sent his clansmen in first and foremost. He was actually the one that got the most kills for Isengard, and I would imagine that comes from like crossbows and the like ranged units. Isengard's ranged support was a very important part of their victory here, especially in the southern engagement across the river. In the bridges, Wilbo and Pharaoh, I think, did what they needed to. Like, Wilbo was aggressive right from the off. Pharaoh as well followed soon after. If they had sort of synchronised that a little bit better, I feel as though Isengard's victory would have been maybe even more telling. But we'll never know now. As for Mirkwood, like, they did what they could for the most part. Like, they did a lot of damage with their ranged units, but in this situation it's always going to be quite difficult because Isengard built their armies well. Like, in this sort of situation, if you're the defenders, like, first of all, you're hoping that Isengard haven't gone in so heavily on like ranged units so that you can have like the undisputed advantage there. Like, you've got your infantry units which will be able to hold for a long time because Mirkwood have got a lot of quality infantry. And then obviously you can just shoot with pretty much impunity. But Isengard didn't allow them to do that, and that comes down to composition. Was there a way Mirkwood could have handled that? Possibly. It would have been a bold move, but maybe retreat further back and make the battle more on open ground. And then try to invest, and then maybe invest a little bit more in stuff like Sindar of the Girdle and Huntsman of Amon Lank. It's a very risky move to do that because Isengard have got all the anti-cavalry tools that you could possibly want. Pikes, spears, crossbows. You know, their Dunlanders have got an anti-cavalry bonus as well, so it's very difficult to face Isengard in that way. But it would have been unexpected, I think. Isengard had so many ranged units that that's the sort of thing that could maybe have worked. But it would have required very good play from Mirkwood with no mistakes. Of course, if you make big mistakes in that way as the defenders in a 5v3, you pretty much put the battle out of reach. So that's probably why Mirkwood didn't go for that, because it's so high risk that they probably didn't think it was worth it in the end, because there's no guarantee that would even have made too much of a difference. But still would have been interesting. For the most part, I think Isengard did deserve their victory and maybe dragged their heels a little bit in the late game, which could have cost them. Like, if Mirkwood had just one more unit and they had set up their defence a little bit better in the late game, that could have been the difference maker. Mirkwood weren't a million miles away from winning this fight, to be honest with you, but Isengard ultimately deserved victors in the end. Let's see what did the damage for all the Isengard army. Stu Balrog, obviously, more so the cannon fodder in the middle section. None of his units actually breaking 100 kills against Mirkwood, which is not too surprising considering Mirkwood's qualities. But his archers, 61, 71 on his crossbows, so yeah, ranged units doing okay. His elite units probably got focused down by the Mirkwood archers. As for Newbie one of his units did break 100 kills, and it was the Uruk-hai pikemen. So pikes, when they don't have to deal with the elven archers, are a very good choice. Because of course Mirkwood really struggled to close that distance that a phalanx offers. Rest of his army fairly similar to Stu Balrog in terms of the numbers. 79 on the Trolls of the White Hands. They did a lot of damage before they fell, relatively speaking. MSQ2, most kills on his team, several units breaking 100 actually. Snaga Skirmish is doing very well. And they were sort of supporting that push in the central choke point in the south. And clearly, you know, they racked up an impressive kill count doing it. So maybe less so the Uruk-hai archers and more so the Snaga skirmishers proving themselves to be a bit of an MVP in this situation, because clearly, you know, over 100 kills on elves with Snaga per unit is a very good performance from MSQ2's units there. The Isengard Ballista did okay as well. Ultimately, it wasn't enough to give Wilbo a victory on his choke point, but it still racked up a good kill count nonetheless, which is all you can ask. And also the crossbows did well. Wilbo, he did actually break 100 kills in his Snaga as well, so it does go to show, yeah. Snaga skirmishers, Isengard MVPs, the rest of the army, of course, real workhorses, which you have to be against the elves in this situation. You can't imagine that your units are going to do amazingly well in terms of kills when you're facing off against the elves in this sort of situation, but yeah. And then over 100 kills on the Snaga again, and the Uruk-hai crossbow. So yeah, definitely a battle where Isengard's range support supported their solid infantry force, and like that's a really good example of what Isengard can do in this situation. And looking at the compositions, it's kind of what I expected, because it was always going to be quite difficult for Mirkwood to answer that to the extent that they kind of needed. But yeah, very, very interesting fight indeed, actually, and big thank you to Newbie1 for sending this one to me. I always like a good themed battle, and it's good to see Mirkwood and Isengard going at it, and it's also good to see Isengard as well displaying what they're all about, because it's always, like, I feel like the elves, they're always going to be popular, but other factions, they sort of come in and out of popularity depending on the patch, and 0.97 has been good to Isengard, I must say. I feel as though they've definitely had a good one so far. We'll see if the hotfix is going to make that continue. But yeah, big thank you to Newbie1 for sending this one to me. Big thank you to all the players, because no one really played all that badly. So big thank you to all of them. As for what's next, like I said, you know, new stuff, channel update video, as I've said at the end of all of the recent battles, like stuff like that is sort of planned, but very loosely. Like it could happen soon, it could happen in a month's time, or it could happen in like several months' time. I'm not sure. It's kind of a fluid situation that I'm in at the moment, like I've kept mentioning. But the current schedule will carry on as best as I'm able to make it happen. But yeah, like I said, if anything changes, it will be relayed in the form of a channel update video. Next one will probably be another Reforged battle, because I did get given like a glut of them all at once, so I'm trying to sort of make sure that I don't build up too much of a backlog. We shall see what one will be next. I'll sort of make the decision based on how much time I have on my next recording day. But yeah, big thank you to all the players, big thank you to Newbie1. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.